As you know, we always start with jokes. So, unless of course we don't. But these are jokes that are, a lot of them are from Russia jokes. You know, when the Jews lived in the eastern part of Europe for over 1,000 years, you know, they migrated from Germany eastward, really to escape a lot of the persecution that was going on in Germany around the time of the Crusades, which is 1096-ish, right? Beginning of the 1100s. And so they migrated to Poland and they migrated from there into Russia. And they had a number of good centuries. And then they didn't. And in 1917, with the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviet creation of the Soviet Union, Jews were persecuted because basically under the Soviet system, God was out and the state was God. So Jews had to be suppressed. They weren't allowed to learn, to study. They weren't allowed to the synagogues were closed mostly. And so they wanted to leave. And when I was coming of age in the 70s, there was a big movement to sort of free Soviet Jewry, to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union. And it largely succeeded. There's not a lot of Jews left in what was the Soviet Union. But these are jokes from that time frame and also from European anti-Semitism. Albert Einstein, who you met as one of our atom smasher, right? From idol smashers to atom smashers. Albert Einstein said, if my theory of relativity is proven successful, Germany will claim me as a German, and France will declare that I'm a citizen of the world. If my theory should prove to be untrue, then France will say I'm a German, and Germany will say that I'm a Jew. So you can't win, right? So heads you lose, tails you lose. During Nasser's reign in Egypt, I don't know if you remember, Nasser was in the late 50s and early 60s in Egypt. He was just one of those strong men of Egypt. And of course, he instigated the 6-Day War, which ended up costing Egypt the Sinai Desert and a lot of other things, which they got back later. But anyway, it goes like this. During Nasser's reign in Egypt, Egyptian archaeologists discovered a mummy much older than any previously discovered. They were totally unsuccessful, however, in dating it. Foreign archaeologists were called in, but although they performed meticulous tests, they too could not ascertain the mummy's age. A group of Russian archaeologists was called in. Russia and Egypt were very close allies in those days. They too had no success, but the KGB agents accompanying them volunteered to date the mummy. Their offer was rejected out of hand. What could they possibly know of such things? Finally, after much prodding, the Egyptians allowed 3 KGB agents into the room with the mummy. An hour later, they emerged. The mummy is from 3625 BC, they said. What, the Egyptians said? How can you possibly know? He confessed. So if I have time, I'll tell you about my adventures in Russia in 1980 in the Soviet Union. In the year 2000, Brezhnev brags in a speech to a large crowd, every Soviet family will have its own airplane. But Comrade Brezhnev, a voice calls out, why does every family need its own airplane? Fool, Brezhnev thunders at the man. Suppose you live in Moscow and you hear that in Kiev they have potatoes. It's interesting. Another variation. In the year 2000, Brezhnev pledges, Russians will go to Mars and all the reaches of outer space. A voice calls out from the crowd, when can we go to America? Yeah. A man saves up enough money to buy a new refrigerator. He goes to the appropriate office and hands over the money. Your refrigerator, the official tells him, will be delivered exactly 10 years from today. In the morning, he asks, or in the afternoon? Why do you need to know that now, the official asks? Because the plumber promised to come in the morning. Comrade Rabinowitz, why were you not at the last meeting of the Communist Party? No one told me it was the last meeting. Had I known, I would have brought my wife and children and some champagne and some snacks. So this one has a little more bite to it. This is a little harsher one. Yeah. So just so you know, at 4 a.m, but I was in the Soviet Union during its heyday in 1980. And, these are jokes, but you really couldn't get things that you would take for granted as an American. Things that were so simple and easy that you could buy here in complete abundance were rare or impossible to get in the Soviet Union. I have dry skin. Anyway, I needed Vaseline, okay? And you think that's an easy thing, right? You go to Rite Aid or you go to Fred Meyer's or you go to Walmart or you go, right? It's not a hard thing. So in the Soviet Union, I asked my guide, where, I need some Vaseline. He says, you'll need to get a thing from the doctor. You have to go. So where's the doctor? So the doctor's on the 17th floor and the elevator's not working. So this is the kind of thing. See, medicine is free. The Vaseline is free, but it took me like half a day. I had to go up 17 flights of stairs. I had to wait for an hour. Then I got a little thing and I got like 2 ounces. But it's free, but it's not free, if you follow what I'm saying. Just a little context for you. At 4 a.m, a line is forming in front of the meat market in Moscow. At 8 o'clock, a vendor appears, sees the length of the line and says, "Comrades, we are sorry. There won't be enough meat for all these people. We have to ask all the Jewish comrades to leave." 1 hour later, the vendor opens the window and says, "We are sorry, but we've just been informed that we will receive less meat than expected. We must kindly ask all non-party members to leave." When only party members are left in the line, the manager appears and says, in confidence, "Comrades, now that we are among ourselves, I can tell you that owing to unprecedented circumstances, our allocation of meat has been canceled completely. We won't have any meat this week." This time the people get angry. Those darn Jews get all the privileges because the Jews got to go home at 8 o'clock in the morning. The other people had to wait for 2 or 3 hours to find out that there wasn't any meat, that they knew all along there wasn't any meat, right? So, okay. So those are Russian jokes. And now we're going to hear music also from Europe called klezmer. And klezmer comes from 2 Hebrew words, klezmer, right? Instruments of melody or melody instruments. And it was a style of music that they played, especially at weddings and at joyous events. And there were itinerant bands that would go all around the little Jewish neighborhoods, the Jewish shtetls and the shtetlach, the little places, the little villages. And they would come for a night or two, and then they would go to the next one and the next one. And this is from the vestiges from that music. This is called Freilich. Freilich means joyful, right? From Freilich. So this is the first one. The heavens will rejoice. It says, Yismachu Hashamayim. Okay, enough of that. So, but you could just see people dancing to it, right? After a wedding, all the joy. Someone has a question.
Yeah, is Freilich German or Yiddish?
Is what?
Would it be Yiddish?
Freilich is Yiddish.
Okay.
Right, right. In Hebrew, it's simcha, but in Yiddish, it's Freilich, yeah. Like a joyful time is Freilich, yeah. Are you guys comfortable on the floor? Is that working for you? Okay, all right. Because, see, I can't tell people, I wanted to say standing room only, but you're sitting, so it doesn't work. So, so that was an example of klezmer. And here's another one, and then we have next week, I think I have some more. So this one is Mama. Oh, this is Brenda. This is our friend singing. Yeah, it's Yiddish too. This is Yiddish. He's falling in love and he doesn't know what to do with himself. Oi, Mama, Mommy, what should I do? I love you. So you just have a little example of klezmer music, the joyful kind of European music. And this is our friend Brenda. She lived in Bend for a couple years, and then she moved back to, where was she from? Ventura, California. So that didn't sound like Ventura, I know, but it's more like the Beach Boys down there. So anyway, so I want to do a little tiny bit of review. Last couple of weeks, we talked about, Abraham as a boundary crosser, Jews as boundary crossers. The word Ivri, which is Hebrew, means someone who crosses over. An Ever is someone who crosses over. So these are geographical boundaries. These are socio-political boundaries, whatever the boundaries are. And oftentimes you see Jews in the forefront of social movements. You see them in the forefront of change and of revolution. We talked about the concept of Abraham as an idol smasher, and then Jacob, his grandson, as a God wrestler, right? Wrestling with God when he's left on the side of the Yamuk River there. And then we talked about Sarah as mother being very central. She doesn't get enough credit, in my opinion. Abraham had how many sons? 8, and Sarah has 1, and we come from Sarah. The concept of covenant, the Brit, the outlawing of child sacrifice forever, through the story of the Akedah, the story of the non-sacrifice of Isaac. Jacob's wrestling once again, then he runs away from his brother because he took the birthright and the blessing, and the 12 tribes have 4 different mothers, which that won't get messy, I don't think, right? It'll all work out just fine. So the favored wife is, do you remember which is the favored wife of Jacob?
Rebecca.
Rebecca is the favored wife, and Leah is the first wife. Rachel, yeah. So Rebecca is with Isaac. So Rachel is the favored wife. He wants to marry her, but he ends up marrying who first?
Leah.
He marries Leah first, exactly. And Rachel has 2 sons. The first is Joseph, right? And the second one is Benjamin. And then she dies, very sadly. So the story of Joseph is precocious. Joseph is anybody really familiar with the Joseph story? I want to tell it. Esther, give it a crack. Take a crack at it.
The 12 sons, and Joseph was favored by his father, and his father did specific things for him to make a point of, this is my favorite son, because he belonged to Sarah.
Right.
And then because of that, the brothers became jealous.
Right.
They, like brothers do, found the best way they could to just undermine whatever Joseph was doing. And more they became jealous. It finally ended up to where they got together and sat around the fire and decided how we're going to kill him. We're going to get rid of him. And then the oldest brother said, no, we can't kill him. We're not supposed to. And they decided to, sell him. And a camel caravan came by and they sold him and took his colorful coat that his father made, put goat blood on it and gave it to their father.
Right.
The grief that they caused their father gave it
Unfounded,
to their father,
yeah.
saying that Joseph's gone.
Right.
And their father could not abide
Right.
by it. He suffered continually after that.
Yeah, this is true. Good job on that. Wow, you got an A.
So the one thing though, his father sends him to go check on the brothers,
Yeah.
right? And to bring back a report. And Joseph's about 17. And Joseph was a dreamer, right? In 2 ways, right? He had daydreams and night dreams, right? So he dreamed that he was the sun and the stars bowed down to him. He dreamed other dreams, and the brothers hated him for it. It says it very clearly in the Torah that they hate him for it. And also Jacob did things that were not necessarily wise. He gave him a ketonet bad pasim, which is a coat of very fine, probably means very fine wool. It's probably not that it's multicolored, even though it's translated that way. It says ketonet bad pasim. It's a coat of finely, what's the word? Not just, no, it's like combed, like very fine wool, the best wool from the very outer edges, I think, of the sheep. So that created more jealousy in the family. And then they were going to sell it. They were going to kill him, but they sold him, and they took a goat. And they said to Jacob, do you recognize this coat? They used the coat, which was the instrument and the focus of their jealousy, right, to punish, in a sense, their father. It's quite a cruel thing. And then Jacob he gets taken down to Egypt by the Ishmaelite caravan, right? Joseph gets taken down into Egypt, where he has his own adventures. But Joseph is also charismatic. He's gorgeous physically. He's brilliant mentally. And he's also centered. He's a very special character. He's probably my favorite character in the entire Torah, the entire Bible, right? Because he matures also, but he has a lot of gifts that he gets. A lot of them you can tell from his mother. And he goes down to Egypt, and Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, from the word tsar. Tsar means a narrow place or a place of constriction. So you have, he goes down to the place of constriction, and he has adventures there. He starts running a house of one of Pharaoh's officials, right, Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife likes him and so forth. It's an interesting story. Normally it's the other way around, but we could believe it that Potiphar's wife liked him. He was physically beautiful person. So you never know. And they go down to Egypt. So I'm going to show you a picture of the Sphinx. And this is the Sphinx. And the nose was shot off by Napoleon's gunners in the 1700s, because they conquered Egypt. And for some reason, they decided to have target practice on the Sphinx. And the Sphinx, by the way, was old when the Jews were there. Right? The Jews were there 3,600 years ago. The Sphinx was old then. So you know how old it is now, right? You can do the
Is
math.
that true?
Is what true?
They shot his nose off.
Yeah, no,
That's
is,
a joke.
that's not a joke. No,
That's not
they
a joke.
target practice, and they were doing target practice. It also shows the disrespect that they have, right? So anyway, that is the Sphinx. And then there's a famine in the land, right? And Israel is very much like, we can go to the next black slide. Yeah. So Israel is like, there's parts of our country that are, and it has to do with, I think it's the 140th meridian, but you have certain wet years, and then you have certain dry years, like Oklahoma, like parts of Texas where the Dust Bowl was, where you have in Nebraska, Kansas, they have good years where you can grow winter wheat, and they have bad years where you can't grow pretty much anything. And of course, that's changing now, probably for the worse too, with global warming and so forth. But essentially, Israel, in the northern part of Israel, is pretty fertile and normally has enough rain. But when you get south of, like, Kiryat Gat, you get south of about 40 kilometers north of Beersheba, it gets too dry, and then further south, it's even much, much drier. But it also has wet years, and it has dry years, and it has famine years, and it has years of plenty. Now, Egypt, on the other hand, it never rains in Egypt, almost, but Egypt always has water. Yes, the Nile, because the Nile is fed from equatorial Africa, and there's always water, right? So the Nile always has water coming down, and they used irrigation there. So there was food in Egypt, and there wasn't food in the land of Israel. There wasn't grain, and so the goats can't eat, the sheep can't eat, the people can't eat. And so they went down to Egypt. The brothers went down because there was a famine. And they're brought before the viceroy of Egypt, who says to them, "Why have you come?" And they say, "We need food." And he gives them a hard time. And it's their brother, Joseph. And the dreams that got Joseph in trouble with his brothers is what saves his life in Egypt, because he's in prison, right? And John Von Brock is on the Zoom, and he was just at a bar mitzvah where this was featured, right, John? You're supposed to say yes. Yes, 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 that's right. He says yes. So, and this is why it's partly in my mind too. So Joseph is in prison with two other prisoners, and he interprets their dreams. And then one of them is reinstated into Pharaoh's household. And Pharaoh has dreams, right? There's 7 blasted and dry ears of grain that are eaten. I'm sorry, that they eat the healthy ones. And there's 7 cows that are emaciated and sickly looking, and they eat the healthy and robust looking cows. And no one knows what this means. But the chamberlain of the cup comes to him and says, I forgot to mention 2 years before I was in jail with this Hebrew youth and he interpreted my dreams. Maybe he can interpret your dreams. And they call him out of prison. They put nice clothes on him, right? Because to come to Pharaoh, you have to wear a suit and tie. And then he interprets the dream and says, it means 7 years of famine will follow 7 years of plenty. And if you don't store the plenty, you won't have any food for the famine. Yes, Esther.
What I like about Joseph's response to them, he says, I can't do this. God is the one who interprets the dream.
God will interpret the dream.
He
Exactly.
absolutely gave God credit.
God, that's one of Joseph's most enduring characteristics is he's modest, right? He doesn't get full of himself, even though he has tremendous prophetic powers. He sees visions and dreams and they come true, right? And he's the second most powerful man in the world at that time, right? Mesopotamia wasn't quite as ascendant as it became later. So Egypt was very powerful. He was the number 2 person to Pharaoh himself. Yeah.
That was one of the things that got him in trouble with his brothers, is that he had the dream and it put the brothers down and the father down.
Yes.
And it put Joseph up by the
Absolutely.
dream.
Right.
And he shared that with them. You know, he
Right.
said, hey, this happened, look at what
Yeah.
God said. And they hated him for it.
Yes. And it also came true.
Yeah.
By the way, right? By the way, it was a true dream, just like Pharaoh's dream was a true dream, right? So we have this wonderful series of events, and they come with their bags to take grain back to Canaan, back to the land of Israel. And the Pharaoh's viceroy gives them a hard time. He does the thing with the cup. There's all these different little things that happen. Bottom line is they do not recognize their own brother. He's probably speaking Egyptian by then, right? He's got a headdress like Pharaoh. Besides, you're not expecting to see your brother as the viceroy, right? You know how they have, recognition in context, right? He wasn't in context. All of a sudden, who is this guy? So anyway, long story short, the Jews come down to Egypt for food. They are given choice lands. They are taken care of. And then something changes, right? We don't know exactly what. There's also historically, there's Hyksos, a Semitic people probably came down in those centuries and controlled Egypt for a few centuries. And that was probably when the Jews were there under good terms. And then the indigenous peoples of Egypt reconquered the land and really didn't appreciate the Jews being there and so forth and so on. Historically and archaeologically, the Torah and what we found line up pretty well. So in that regard, okay.
It is a curious thing that God does with jealousy with the Jews all over history, and with this specifically too. It's with jealousy, and he turns it around and he uses it for good. Right,
in this case, yeah, in many cases. So, but this gets the Jews into Egypt. Okay, so we have, in other words, they can't come out of Egypt until they've gotten into Egypt, right? So we're gonna get them out of there, right? But first they have to be there. So eventually he recognizes, he tells the brothers who he is, and he forgives them. He says, God will forgive you. He doesn't have to, but he does. And so there's reconciliation, even though they fear him. Just like Jacob and Esau have reconciliation, right? And they kiss and they hug and so forth and so on, even though later on they don't want anything to do with each other. The same thing here, there's reconciliation. So this is such powerful teaching for us, because you think, oh, that person offended me so badly, I could never. Well, they sold their brother into slavery and they lied to their father about it, and they still have reconciliation. Reconciliation, right? Forgiveness can happen even out of a terrible, terrible thing. Can you hold it, Esther, for one? I know you're so eager. I love your energy and stuff. So, but I want to get a little bit more into the story. So, so the Jews are in Egypt for between 210 and 400 years. So it's different ways of calculating the time, and there's different opinions in Jewish tradition about how long they were in Egypt. But 2 to 4 centuries in Egypt, much of it as slaves to Pharaoh. They didn't build the Sphinx, they didn't build the pyramids, but they built store cities, Pithom and Ramses, and so forth and so on. And if you listen to the name Ramses, right, it's Ra Moses, right, the son of Ra, and you can hear within it the name Moses. So there's a little precursor there when Moses is going to show. So Esther, you're on. What did you have?
Oh, Joseph's comment to his brothers. His brothers, in the end, it's all said and done. They're reinstated, and then the brothers were feeling very badly because of their conviction of
Yeah.
it. They were going to kill him. They
Right.
became convicted of that. And then Joseph said, "Wait a minute. What you meant for evil, God meant.
God meant for good, right?
He gives God credit
All the time. He's great that way. But I think also the brothers were a little nervous. It wasn't just that. It was like, can we really trust that he's going to really forgive us, and so forth? Because he was in a very powerful position to do anything he wanted to them, as he showed them when he took the cup and he hid it, and they had to leave Benjamin. They had all these different tricks that he did to see if they were going to do to Benjamin what they had done to him. You study that story and there's a lot in there, right? You can learn so much about people and humanity and history, everything good in that story. So, but anyway, the Jews are in Egypt, and it's really bad times, right? Because what are they doing? Is anybody familiar with this is the Passover story, right? Is anybody comfortable enough to say a few sentences about that story? Jan? Yeah.
Well, as far as Passover, part of the plagues that God did to Pharaoh and Egypt to get the Hebrew people to be released and set free,
Right.
go worship their God. The last plague that has to do with Passover is the death of the firstborn.
Right.
And the protection for the Hebrew people was for each household to take an unblemished lamb, and it needed to be sacrificed,
Right.
so to speak, not like they did in the temple, but in their home, in that they put the blood on the doorposts and the lintel of their home,
Right.
and they roasted the lamb. It all had to be eaten
By the morning, yeah.
right, but
True.
everything else, and they had to stay in their home.
Right.
And when the angel of death saw the blood on the doorpost and lintel, it
Right.
would pass over.
Right.
But the firstborn of everything else would die. That would be animals as well as all the Egyptian
Right.
households.
Right.
So the Passover lamb, because the angel of death passed over.
Exactly. Pasach, exactly. So, but before we got to that, that's like the climax. That's the end of that story,
All the rest
right?
of
So
it.
Pharaoh understands that there will be a redeemer for the Jews, and he becomes fearful, just like Herod later on, right? Thousands of years later, the same thing. So he institutes that all Jewish boys will be thrown into the Nile and killed, right? So a baby is born to a couple, Amram and Yochebed, and the baby is put into a basket. It's called in Hebrew a teva. And the only time in the Torah that word is used is twice. It's the basket for Moses, and it's also the ark for Noah. It's the same word, teva. So you have, in other words, the savior, in a sense of the next generation or the number of generations, is in this protected basket. In the case of Noah, it's a much bigger basket, but in the case of Moses, it's a little tiny basket. And so they float him in the Nile among the reeds, right? Because there were reeds, which is where we get papyrus from. And lo and behold, Pharaoh's daughter is bathing down at the Nile, and she sees this baby and she immediately is drawn to it. And there's a young girl who comes along, maybe she's 7 or 8 or 9 years old, and she says, "Have I got a nursemaid for you?" And all of a sudden, that's Miriam, Moses' older sister. And of course, Moses' mother becomes the nursemaid in the thing. So we have this picture here, which I like this picture. And this is Miriam. And this is baby Moshe, you see, and this is Pharaoh's daughter. Do we know her name? It says Bat Paro, I think. Do we know her name? Joshua, do you know her name? I don't know. Does anybody know? Have you ever heard a name for her?
Yeah, Bachi.
Batya?
Is that, I think?
I think the midrash is that her name is Batya, which means like daughter of God. It's and Yah, no, B-A-T like Y-A-H, Batya. And like Yah is the feminine aspect of godliness, and Bat means daughter. So Batya is daughter of God. It's a beautiful name. But I love this image, you know. And they're all getting wet and they're all happy, you know? So you can see, yeah. So Miriam saves her brother, right? And then we have another image after that. Oh, there's all our friends on Zoom. So this is another, no, it's okay. Doing great. Did you want to make it smaller? Oh, you're dragging it. Okay, okay. So this is a reenactment of the crossing of the Red Sea. And it's like accurate schmaccurate. If you want this story to sell, it needs some punching up. So this is what really happened. And they made this whole grand thing about it, right? So there are plagues, right? And the Jews in the end, after the plagues, the Jews are allowed to leave. In fact, are told to leave. And then as soon as they leave, what happens? Pharaoh what?
He wants some.
Changes his mind. You're losing hundreds of thousands of free workers, of slaves, right? And he says, wait a minute, we're going to go get them. So he sends the army with chariots, right? Because they had chariots. And they get, so this is the other, this is about the splitting of the sea. You see, this is the, and you notice he's got the hands raised, right? Because that's really Moses had the hands raised. So the water, this is the parting of the Red Sea, but this is the parting of the swimming pool. So anyway, and you know, I'll tell you something. He's not leading by very much. He should have a better lead than that, I think, if he's running and they're swimming. So anyway, these are just two comics that I saw about it. So anyway, so they go out into the desert, and then of course Pharaoh's army is coming right behind them, and they're between literally death at the sea and death from Pharaoh's army, or certainly re-slavery. And then the miracle happens where the east wind blows all day and it splits the sea, and the Jews can walk on dry land to get to the other side. And as soon as Pharaoh's army starts to chase them, then the sea collapses on them, and then many of them don't survive. So there's another image, I think. So that's the next one.
Yeah.
So this is the 10 Commandments image of Moses. And then we're going to read from the Torah in a few minutes. So are there any, just to check in with you, how are we doing? Good. I'm getting some thumbs up. Question?
I'm just a bit confused. When Pharaoh wanted to kill the babies a year and under,
Right, only the boy babies.
and what had happened before that he wanted to do that?
He was warned that there would be a deliverer of the Jews. In other words, that there would be a baby born that would grow up to basically free the Jews. So he thought the answer to that was to kill all the boys. Okay. This happens. I mean, this kind of thinking sometimes happens, you know. So Don, yeah.
Sometimes instead of calling it the Red Sea. Sometimes another interpretation or source that calls it the Sea of Reeds.
Yes,
Yeah.
And the wind blows the reed, blows the tide and allows them to cross. Instead
absolutely.
of that
Yeah,
tunnel with
Right,
water separating.
right,
either way.
right.
Yeah. So
The tradition is that it was like a wall, but that's enough, but that you're right about that. I mean, the way nature works, there's normally not walls, there's gentle divisions and gradations of things. But it is in Hebrew the Yam Suf, which is the Reed Sea. It is the Reed Sea. And the Red Sea is really south, like where Eilat, dividing Egypt and Saudi Arabia, that's really the Red Sea. In the north, it's really the Reed Sea. And because it wasn't an ocean like you think of an ocean. It's a very shallow sea, a couple feet deep, 2-3 feet, depending on, it's like more like a tidal mud flat, which we have here in Bellingham, right? I mean, so it's that kind of a thing, much more so than, it's not like the Atlantic Ocean, or the Pacific Ocean, and there was all this huge opening, It was a very much probably more gentle kind of thing. And then as the story gets retold, generation after generation after generation, like,
or from different sources.
or from different sources too. Esther,
Well, how many soldiers died in the sea?
I
Following?
don't, a
thought
lot,
it was
I
a
think
whole
it had a whole army, yeah.
But it wouldn't be a few feet of water.
Well, that's true too, but there also are different, it gets deep at some times and not so deep. There's also shallow portions and deeper portions. So, but I mean, what a person can walk over and what a chariot can go over are two very different things.
Yeah.
But it just says that they were drowned in the sea. So, and you can drown in a bathtub too. So, and of course, if you're stuck in the mud, it's I don't know.
I think I've
Yeah.
always understood it to be that they were on chariots with the horses racing through the mud and suddenly you're stuck and the tide's coming in and.
Yeah,
it could
that
happen.
that could work. That could work. Yeah, we were just down in where was it? Port Angeles.
Yeah.
At the tidal pools, and we were looking at and we had to really keep one eye on the tide because there were certain paths coming back and they were getting kind of closed with the tide, and you had to watch it. You had to keep track of it. So, but anyway, they get out of Egypt and they get to the other side, and Moses sings a song of the sea, as you know, and then they wander a little bit and they get to Mount Sinai a couple months later. And okay. So, and then then they receive the Torah, especially the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. So we're going to do that, reenact that right here. But before that, we're going to show you what really happened, because another Jewish genius has created, now you got to bring that back over. Yeah, this is I think Charlton Heston, and this is Proto-Canaanite. This is like a more ancient, because the Hebrew that you're going to see today in the Torah is actually Babylonian letters, but this is older. This is Proto-Canaanite, right? This is older. And so, and that's Charlton Heston. And then we get to the actual story.
Okay.
See if we could show that.
Yeah.
Can the people on Zoom see?
Yeah.
They can see, okay. So there's Charlton Heston. And then we have this one, which is the actual story.
Ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Moses went to the mountain and God spoke unto him.
Moses, this is the Lord thy God commanding you to obey my law. Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, I hear you. A deaf man to hear you.
What?
Nothing, I punished you, forget it. Oh Lord, why have you chosen me? What did you have me do for you?
I shall give you my laws, and you shall take them unto the people.
Yes, Lord. Lord, I shall give these laws unto thy people. Hear me. Oh, hear me. All pay heed. The Lord Jehovah has given unto you these 15 10
Yes, that's Mel Brooks. So that was Mel Brooks. Yeah. So I want to invite everyone to come up. I don't know if we can maybe move your chair, your thing back and then move some chairs around. And if I have a reader and Esther, I'm very fond of you, as you know, but I want another reader because you read so, oh, yes. And your name is?
Kathy.
Kathy. Come up, Kathy.
Geraldine wanted to know what about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart?
Oh, what about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart? So there's a question. Geraldine wants to know about the hardening of. So that's a great question, and that's something really to, I think, talk about at your Passover table this year, and to ask people to come prepared to talk about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Why does God make it? Why does God make it hard, and why doesn't Pharaoh, after the Nile turns to blood? Why doesn't Pharaoh just say, okay, you can go? I realize the power, and so forth. It is like a humbling of Pharaoh, that here is someone has enslaved God's chosen, so to speak, and that there has to be an accounting for that. And so, and it's some of our sensibilities, I think it's difficult to understand that idea a little bit. But that's, I mean, the thing that we have is now the thing that we have is the text. And in the text, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Not once, right? Because there's 10 plagues. There's not once. There's darkness and there's, the blood of the Nile and so forth and so forth and so on. So we're going to read from the Torah. So are people comfortable to stand around the Torah to come up? I'll make room with my thing here. And then we'll go over here. And then you're going to read this where it's in yellow. And then you're right, it goes this way. And then you'll stop there. Okay. And, or let's see. Well, you know what? You can just read this. Okay. And does it have, so let me get it. So who knows what this is?
Shofar.
Yeah, exactly. Shofar is so good, right? So this is the shofar, and it's a good one. And this is from a kudu. This is from an African antelope. It's the largest antelope there is. I mean, just imagine living your life dragging this around everywhere you go. It's heavy, but that's that's how it goes. They're very big and powerful. They weigh 600 pounds, a little more. They're big animals. So this is from the kudu, right? And at Mount Sinai, there were so everybody's over there, like maybe a few more people over here. So at Mount Sinai, because they were surrounding this mountain, and we have to take off this. Can you guys, thanks, Ken.
Wow.
So we'll take
Now we
this
have
off.
everybody in front.
This is this is for reading. You don't touch the Torah when you read from it. So can you, we're going to take off the dress.
Are you ready?
Well, I guess so. And it's Kathy
Yes,
with a K?
yes.
Oh, wow, I got lucky there.
Have you already explained the significance of this particular?
I haven't done anything like that. No. So this is called a simla. This is a dress. Just like a woman wears a dress, the Torah has a dress. The articles of clothing for a Torah are the same as for a person. They're the same names. A woman wears a simla. This is a simla, right? And this is to protect it, but it's also for beautification. It's not just, you could put a plastic bag or something. And a Torah,
Well, you make him big.
is, he's my oldest son, and what can I do? So, and he's wonderful. So the thing is that this is actually a traveling Torah. It's not a Torah that it comes from CBI. Oh, Peggy has something.
I don't have anything. I
What?
just have a question.
Oh, well, I mean, that's what I mean.
Well, it's a feminine word
Yes,
that dresses the Torah. Is the Torah
seen almost as a feminine object.
Torah absolutely is feminine. Exactly.
So gosh, that gets to all sorts of levels too, because it's a symbol of God.
Also,
It's
yes.
God in our presence.
In a sense, it's not, I think that's, you're taking, I mean, I think
Can I
you
take it?
you took it a little bit too far. It's the word of God in our presence.
Okay.
No, you can say that, but it's all, but it is feminine. Exactly. So she,
Yeah.
okay, that's her pronoun in modern parlance. She wears a dress. She has jewelry. Many times you'll see the Torah has a crown, or it has what are called rimonim, which are pomegranates. It has beautiful decorations of Torah. And so this Torah is an older Torah that had a little bit of water damage, and I think it's not exactly, if one word cannot be read in a Torah, it's no longer a kosher Torah. And by kosher, I mean fit for use. You probably know the word kosher dealing with food, right? But it's fit for eating, but this is fit for sacred use. Yes.
I was just thinking that the word of God in the Gospel of John is logos,
Yeah.
a Greek word,
Right.
and it's masculine. So a little bit of a contrast between the mindset of a Jewish approach to
Right.
God
Right.
as opposed to a Christian approach.
It's possible. I mean, you could get there from the text. Yeah.
What about Rhema?
Hold on.
If
Hold on.
this Torah
Yeah.
is damaged in some way,
Yeah.
and it is no longer being used in the synagogue for a service,
Right.
what happens to that?
Well, if it's damaged beyond repair, let's say it was in a fire
Mhm.
and the top third of it is burned completely, that would be buried.
Okay,
Okay, with ritual. I mean, it's dealt with almost like a person.
yeah, I ask
Okay.
that because, and I have several Bibles that have been given to me for storage. But I also have some that are very damaged, so much so that I'm holding them at this point.
Okay.
And no one has been able to answer how I should take care of them.
Okay.
And I've been told, bury them, burn them, or just toss them. And
I'm not crazy about the last two.
I know, I'm not either, which is
But-
why I still have them.
And you bury it in you do what's called shamus, you bury it in a place. Now, in the Sephardic or in the North African world of Jewry, in the Middle Eastern, in Iraq and in Lebanon and in Syria and in that part of the world, they really didn't bury so much as they had a separate building where things were kept because it was dry, very dry climate. Things didn't get moldy, and it's called a geniza in that part of the world. And the Cairo geniza had thousands and thousands of parchments over 1,000 years old, 1,200 years old, 1,500, and much of that has been saved. Much of it was lost. But in Eastern Europe, things were buried. Right, it was done differently. Two different traditions there. But it's not just buried. I mean, you'd make like a vault. You'd make like concrete blocks or something, and then you'd have a space. You don't just stick it in the dirt and pile a bunch of dirt on top of it.
Right.
It's not that kind of buried. So, but anyway, and a Torah is handwritten on parchment, right? This is, it's written on cowhide or deer. It has to be a kosher animal, right? So you can't write a Torah on the hide of a pig, for example. It has to be written on a deer or a cow, a reindeer you could do. And so it's handwritten, and then there's different family traditions. Certain families have, I'm sorry, you were going to read and I'm just.
No, this is
But-
very interesting.
There's the ink is like oftentimes a family secret, like how, like the father to the sons and the father to the son, and how to make the ink and how to, so that it will last for a century or two. So Torahs last a long time if they're taken care of well. They last centuries, right? I just ordered something online from, it's 200, 250 years old. It's a piece of a Torah. It's not the whole thing. It's only 3 sections of a Torah. It's very small, but it's still around. It's from Algeria from 200 and something years ago. So, so let's put that somewhere. It's always the same. The text is identical. So I mean, if you go back to the oldest codex of the Torah is the Aleppo Codex, and it goes back to the 4th, 5th century, I think, something like that. It's very old. So, and there's like no variation. they find it's identical word for word in many cases. So, oh,
Question.
yes,
So this starts on the far right with Genesis 1.
this
And
starts,
what's at the end?
well, the end I'm going to read for you actually is the death of Moses, actually.
Deuteronomy.
The end of Deuteronomy.
Okay, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just the
5 books.
So what is the
And-
tradition for the reverence that you treat this object? Is that from the fact that they weren't supposed to touch the ark, which had the tablets in it? Or is it, do you know the origins of?
Well, I just think that I mean, in other words, it's the oldest text that we have.
This,
And not this Torah specifically, but this, I mean, in other words,
right,
this is a sample of it, but essentially all of Judaism has its roots in this document.
Okay.
And for that matter, Christianity as well.
sure,
So this is our shared document. If you have in your church the Bible, so to speak, you'll notice the first 80% of it is this, right? And it's translated, it's in a book form, it's not in a scroll form, but it's the same, it's identical, okay? It's word for word. How it's interpreted and what it means and how it's translated, there are differences. But the actual text, and this is the text. In other words, I can't go back further than this and say, what did we have before this? There's nothing before this. This is, because like it starts, how does it start? In the beginning, right? That's how it starts. So at the beginning is the beginning, right? And so I can't show you the beginning because it would take me 10 minutes to roll it there. It's a complicated thing to roll the Torah, and it's time consuming, right? So, and it has, this is the belt. My wife just fixed it. It was too loose and she tightened it. She put a little pleat in here, but this is called a chagurah. And this is a chagurah. It's also a feminine word, right? But it's a belt, and it's also a lot of times, like I was saying, a Torah would have a breastplate, like the high priest had a breastplate. So the Torah oftentimes has a breastplate, or it has a crown, like a Jewish king would have worn a crown. So the Torah has a crown, the Torah has a breastplate. They've taken some of those symbols and put those onto the Torah. So.
We owe our Bible to the Jew and the keeper of the word. You hold it as a great treasure. You don't adjust it. You don't change it. You keep it the way that it is, and you enforce that. And it's because of that we have the word. Thank you.
Well, you're most welcome. I mean, and what a joy to come here and teach it and show it to you and share it with you. So let's set the stage. So we got out of Egypt. We were slaves, right? So get your mind around this, right? We were slaves for generations and generations, right? It wasn't like a week or two. And the Holy One brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. And we come into the desert and we come to this mountain, and we're going to have basically a revelation. So, and a revelation for all time, not for a little while. Sometimes there's things that they're true for a while, and then they're not true anymore, right? This is like forever true. This is this is on a different level, right? So you're up.
This is a reading from Exodus 19, starting in verse 16. On the third day, when it was morning, there was thunder and lightning and a heavy cloud on the mountain. And the sound of the shofar was very The sound of the shofar was very powerful, and the entire people that was in the camp shuddered.
Okay, we shudder now. Everybody shudder. You're not shuddering, Peggy. Come on, shudder now. Okay, great. Okay, okay. I have to blow this louder if you're going to shudder. I can see that now. You guys are tough. You're not easily impressed. Go ahead.
Moses brought the people forth from the camp toward God, and they stood at the bottom of the mountain. All of Mount Sinai was smoking because Hashem had descended upon it in the fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of the furnace, and the entire mountain shuddered exceedingly. The sound of the shofar grew continually much stronger.
Amen.
Wow.
Amen.
Moses would speak and God would respond to him with a voice.
So, come everyone close. I know, and if you feel shy from COVID, I understand it too. So, and Esther, hold that handle. So one thing when you read the Torah, this is called a yad. This is a hand. It's a special tool, an instrument to read the Torah with. You don't put your finger on it because your finger has oil, or dirt, or something. So you take the chain and you put what?
I'm gonna hold this up.
Oh, okay. No, she's showing for the Zoomites. For the Zoomsters. Hold that even at an angle so down so they can see there. So the first thing to know that I teach my bar mitzvah kids is you take the chain and you put it in your hand because you don't want the chain dragging across. You'll erase letters accidentally, right? So if a letter comes off the Torah, it's not a kosher Torah anymore. One letter missing, it's not the Torah, right? And Elohim, which is actually a plural version of God, right? Elohim et kol advarim ha'ele lemor. The Holy One spoke the following things. Anochi, I, but that's like a formal I. Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeiticha. I am Adonai Elohecha who brought you out. Lahotzi, there's some Jews in the room. You know the word lahotzi from David?
Lowe's, I know.
Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Right? You know, right? Hamotzi, to bring out bread from the earth. But it's the same word, lahotzi, from Mitzrayim, to bring out. Hotzeiticha meretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim, from the house of slavery. Lo yelecha Elohim acherim al panai. You'll have no other gods before me. On my face, literally. Not in front of me. Lo ta'aseh lecha fesel. You'll make no graven image. B'chol tumuna, and any other representation or image. So someone said the other day about Jewish arts and like physics and science and math and economics and medicine. Jews are way overrepresented, but not in the plastic art and not in art so much. And that comes from right here, right? You'll make no image of anything of the heavens above, and of the earth below, and from the waters, underneath the earth, which is the sea. You will not bow down to them. And you will not serve them. Because I, Adonai Elohecha, the word we don't say, and Elohecha, et Elkanah, this is often translated as a jealous God, Elkanah, but it's really a passionate God. It's a much better translation to capture the sense of it, is a passionate God. El poked avon avot abanim, and the word poked is really critical also. Poked is often translated as I visit the sins of the fathers on the sons or something like that. It really means I account for. Okay, because the same word is for Sarah, right? Adonai pakad et Sarah. And God remembered, it says, it's translated, remembered Sarah. That means God forgot Sarah. But it's God accounted for Sarah. It's much more accurate, right? Okay. Elkanah poked avon avot abanim al shileshim v'aribeim asonai. I account for the sins of the fathers on the sons for 3 and 4 generations for those who hate me, which is a small amount of time and a small number because a lot of people are apathetic about God. Not many people hate God. That's a very strange thing. But listen to the rest of it. And I do loving kindness. Now, chesed in Hebrew is loving kindness in English, but I think it comes closest in the Christian context to the word grace. Undeserved love, undeserved forgiveness, right? It's chesed in Hebrew, but I think in a Christian context, you have the word grace for that same concept. La'alafim, so chesed la'alafim, loving kindness to thousands of generations, for those who love me and guard my commandments. you might notice there's a big difference in the quality of the writing on here versus here. Maybe you won't notice it, but this is wonderfully clear and easy to read. This is difficult to read because this was repaired and it wasn't repaired that well. And so this is, it's difficult sometimes to repair a Torah because they have to like erase it and sand it and then they put it, and it's never the same because it just doesn't have that the same what's the word? It doesn't have the same surface, the same, yeah.
May I ask,
So
who is responsible for writing the Torah? Is it? I
there's a
mean,
guy, he
rabbi?
lives in Peoria, Illinois. His name is
Can I
Fred
answer?
Smolowitz. And he writes, it's incredible. It's like, he
No,
writes
no,
all
no.
the Torahs. He writes.
No, there's a person
No,
called
did
a sofer, which is a scribe, and they find a mentor that they study with, and it's something that is done with like great intention and concentration, and it takes a year to write a Torah. Approximately, it can be done in a different length of time, but it's considered a very sacred thing, and a Torah is checked like 3 times, make sure that nothing is incorrect.
It's checked backwards, it's checked forward.
And if a person who's the scribe makes a mistake in the Torah, they can use a X-Acto knife and write it off. But if it's in the name of, if it's one of God's names, then that piece, and because there's pieces that are.
In other words, this is a section here. You see the seam?
So they would
It's
take
sewed
that out
together.
and they would bury it and they would do a new one.
Right.
But it's very sacred. Like the person that does it would go to the mikveh in the morning and maybe spend 4 hours writing with, great concentration and great maybe passion, the person that does that. And recently there are very few, it's usually a men, but there's a woman, Sofer, who's in the Seattle area, and there may be a few others that I don't know about, but traditionally it's been a man, but has changed a little bit.
And
too.
Judy actually does a lot with Hebrew calligraphy and with letters from the Torah, and she writes names. I mean,
I
she
think
does
it's
really,
a little
you
different
do
what I
really
do.
beautiful.
It's different.
Is it a training that you
Oh,
pay?
yeah, but
absolutely,
it's
yeah.
it's training, but
Does
it's
one person do the whole?
yeah,
Yeah,
usually,
this would normally
yeah.
be one person would do that. Takes a year.
How
Takes-
long is this?
This goes all the way to Deuteronomy.
Oh, if you opened it up,
Oh, I don't know how long.
no, if you opened it up, would probably be like
It would go all
circle
around
the
it,
room.
Even bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's big. It's
How do you know where you are in there? Like, does it say Deuteronomy?
No,
or-
no.
You have to know. You know, because you know. Yeah, there's no notes in here.
And the order is different from
There's not
our
even
holy
punctuation
scriptures.
between the
There's
sections.
no,
There's no vowels, no
capital letters,
punctuation.
no-
How do you know where you are right now?
I just read it for you. I know where I
I
am.
know what you read, but do you know where it's from? How do you
Of
know?
course I know where it's from.
And in the
It from
Christian
practice
holy
or-
scriptures.
It's from
A lot of
it's from
practice.
exposure to it.
A lot of
But
practice.
Kathy just read it for us, right? It was, what was it? Exodus
Well,
19.
see, that's how you know where it is,
But-
because she read it in Deuteronomy.
Right. No, I rolled it to here. 'cause I
But
had it.
between like each.
And the way I can tell you how I know this is the 10 Commandments. It's the only place in the Torah where you see low, 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 low. You can see thou shalt, no adultery, no stealing, no this, no that, no, 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 no. It's always lined up like this. And there's nothing else in the Torah that looks like that.
And also like between each book of the Torah, there'll be space.
Okay.
And then each Torah portion, will be separated by space. So if you get to Torah portion Miketz, like you see those words. So if have a certain learnedness, you'll find it
You can
takes
find it
practice.
pretty, if you know the Torah pretty well, you can find, you just need the first 3-4 words and you know where you are.
Okay.
So like this piece by the Elohim, this is easy to find because there's a big gap in front of it.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you
Yeah,
want
we
to
have
find
another
something in the
question.
middle of this, it's tough.
Jay, Don has a
For our
question too.
English Bible, we don't have those breaks in there. They're not identified by number. They're not done this. Those are added for our convenience. It's not a sacred thing. So we have the same groupings of writings, and it's perpetual, it's continual.
Jay, Don has a
Don
question.
has a question.
On Sabbath, do you have a lectionary like the Christian church has for a specific reading?
Yes.
Sabbath by Sabbath?
Yes, we've
Yes.
had that for something like 18 centuries. Each, there's 54 parashot, there's 54 divisions of the Torah. And you say, well, there's only 52 weeks in the year, but there's actually some Jewish years have 55 weeks, 56 weeks, because there's a leap month in there. It's a long story. But anyway, there's a different thing to read every week, and everyone around the world reads the same thing every week, more or less. There's always there. So one more question. Yes.
We got a lot of questions.
Have you explained the difference between the Torah and the Haftarah?
I have not. That's another thing that's read, and in fact, that's in the New Testament as well. But there's a prophetic reading that goes along with the Torah reading as well.
Because
Right.
the prophets aren't in this.
The prophets are not in here.
Right.
The writings are not in here.
Oh.
The book of Ruth is not in here. The book of Esther's not in here. This is just the 5 books.
Oh,
That's what's in here. Think how big this would be. You couldn't even compare it.
But you wait, there's a couple more questions. I think you
Okay.
Kathy.
Okay.
I just wondered, is every Torah scroll the same sections? I mean, does
It's
it
ex-
always start with this word and?
This is an Ashkenazi Torah. This is a Torah in the Eastern European tradition. And the rows, the columns and the rows are the same. But a Sephardi Torah from North Africa or the Middle East looks different than this. And it also has a different case, a different housing. It stands vertically. It's read vertically. It's a different, this is.
But the
read-
words are, I mean, it's the same exact
Same
words.
exact words. And Sephardi, I like actually the handwriting, the Sephardi handwriting is more beautiful in a way. But I want to get back to this, okay? Because I want to read for us again. And I want to unpack this piece because I want you to understand it on a deeper level. So I am a passionate God who accounts for the sins of the sons of the fathers on the sons for 3 and 4 generations of those who hate me. So the most that can go forward in time is how many generations? 4. And then it says, and I do loving kindness for thousands of generations. So what's the least that can go forward?
1,000.
No, it's
2,
thousands.
right, 2.
2,000s. So the ratio of justice, if you will, or harshness to loving kindness is 4 to 2,000. In other words, it's 2,000 loving kindness to 4 of judgment. And if you reduce that fraction, you get to what?
500 to
1.
500 to
Yeah,
1,
there you go.
exactly. So the ratio, so you have in our tradition, in the Christian tradition, of course you have, and you are proud of it, that you have a loving God and a God not of works, but of grace, right? Essentially, the Jews do too. They don't necessarily know it. But when you do the numbers, it's 500 to 1, which, by the way, it's 99.8%, which is pretty good, right? You can't buy silver that's 99.8% pure. You can't buy gold that's 99. You can't even get that stuff. There's no such thing. So it's 99.8% mercy
Oh, Gerald.
and some little sprinkling of judgment, right? Okay.
So just
so-
for fun, Jesus said forgiveness of 70 times 7, which is
For
last year 500.
yeah, there you go. Exactly. 7.
Wow.
It's 490.
Hey.
Right? Hey, because first of all, he's Jewish, so he was good at math.
Exactly.
And he knew this.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was my point. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's keep going. Lo tisad shem Adonai Elohecha l'shav. You will not lift up God's name for nothing. And this is important. Ki lo yinakeh Adonai et asher yisa et shmo l'shav. God will not cleanse someone who lifts up God's name for nothing. This is a powerful thing to say that, because we do something on the high holidays, right? And there's a couple of Jews in here. Adonai, Adonai, Rachum v'chanun, erech apayim, rav chesed v'emet, nosir chesed la'alafim. And what else? Nosei avon v'fesha v'chata v'nakeh. And the one who cleanses, right? It says right here. So that's a partial quote. In the Jewish liturgy, there's a partial quote that says God cleanses. But in reality, the rest of that quote says, but not completely. But we don't say that. We don't say it. We err on the side of positive. Okay. Now, this is another thing you should know, that this is the Sabbath here. This whole piece, right, is 33 or 34% of the verbiage of the Ten Commandments is the Sabbath day, right? So this is a big deal. Zachor, remember, at Yom HaShabbat, at the Sabbath day, L'kadsho, to its holiness. Sheshet Yamim Ta'avod. 6 days you will work. The big note, because you can learn what the Torah means also by how it's sung.
Sure.
It's not just the words, it's the melody, right? It's lyrics and melody. It's two things combined. So you have the big note is on work. So the Sabbath is about work, and then you get to rest, right? You'll do all your creative labor. Yom HaShavi, the Sabbath day. Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha is the Sabbath to God. Lo taseh chol malacha. You'll do no creative labor. Hata uvincha, you and your son, right here. See, this is true again. He's very good. He's very good about it. He keeps Sabbath in his house beautifully. We always have wonderful Shabbat there. So ata, I lost my place. Uvitcha and your daughter, Avdecha and your manservant, V'amatcha and your maidservant, Uvehemtecha and the beasts, V'gercha and the stranger or the proselyte, Asher b'sharecha, that's within your gates, Kisheshet yamim, because in 6 days, Asal Adonai et hashamayim v'et haaretz, the Holy One made the heavens and the earth, et hayam and the sea, v'et kol asher bam, and all that's within them, Vayanach, and God rested, and it's the same word as Noach, right? Noah in the Bible is from nach, from rest and from being at peace. Vayanach, Vayom Hashvi, on the 7th day, Al Kain Beirach Adonai, therefore God blessed at Yom HaShabbat, the 7th day. Vayikadshehu, made it holy. Kabed et abicha v'yetimecha. This is another one from my boy over here. Kabed et abicha v'yetimecha, honor your father and your mother. Lema'an ya'arichon yimecha, that your days will be lengthened. Al ha'adama asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach, on the land that God is giving you. Lo tirtzach, no murder. It doesn't say thou shalt not kill. Right? Did your Bible say that in English? Yeah, okay, sorry. It would say lo taharog, but it doesn't say that. It says lo tirtzach, no murder. Lo tin'af, no adultery. Lo tignov, no stealing. And that includes kidnapping. Lo tanevarecha et shaker, you will not be a lying witness against your neighbor. Can you imagine how rotten that is? To be in a court of law and lie about your neighbor? Terrible, right? Lo tachmod beit re'echa, you will not covet your neighbor's house. Lo tachmod eshet re'echa, your neighbor's wife and your neighbor's husband, of course, by extension. Avdo and his manservant, amato and his maidservant, v'shoro and his ox, right? That's his F-350 truck. V'chamoro, that's his Ram pickup. That's his diesel 1500, right? V'chamoro and his donkey, which is his F-150 gas truck. V'chol asher l'recha, and everything that belongs to your neighbor. So then we're going to roll her up. And I would, sometimes this is a little heavy to do Haggadah. So in a synagogue, what you do,
David can do
lift it and you show it to everyone. David, you want to do Haggadah for us? Okay. So David, so it's a very low ceiling and the lights and stuff. We want to leave this church the way we found it. So just do the 3 rows.
When the Torah is read, does everyone stand?
No, they when we take it out of the ark.
You see the scratch marks? That's where the sofa.
When you take it out of the ark, we stand and we march around with it. And then once it's put down, then everybody sits. So it's just when you put, and then when we're going to take, like, when you, like right now, when you're going to roll it up and put it away, everybody stands. And then once you put it in, but when it's read, we sit. But there's, yeah.
So I wanted to show you that English, we have lines and we write above the line. Hebrew is called a hanging language. The sofa makes a scratch with a sharp instrument and then he writes, the letters hang, it's almost like a laundry line, like a clothesline. The letters hang down, right, from it, right? And you can see it faintly. I don't know if you can see the scratch marks.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see those? Yeah.
Let you do
Okay,
it.
good, okay. So we're going to,
You said, Jay,
hold on, let
That's
me,
fine.
okay, so.
Linda
and
has a
then-
question.
Okay,
you said that it's sung and that you know what's important by by the note.
you can get you can get meaning out of the note. In other words, there's meaning there because the biggest note in the commandment about the Sabbath is on the word work. So it's very instructive.
So how does you read it in that way? Does everyone read it that way?
More or less. Yeah. Well, there's different, once again, there's different traditions based on where the Jews were from and whether they were living under Islam or whether they were living under Christianity, essentially. You can divide the world that way for many, many centuries.
So there must be a long period of mentoring to be able to read.
Wait, there's also, so there's a book that we have that other people have called a tikkun, which has the Hebrew, the way it is in the Torah, and then next to it, it has the Hebrew with the notes and the vowels.
I see.
But it used to be, I mean, it was a received tradition and then it was written down, basically.
It was an
Wow.
oral tradition for a long time. It wasn't written down until 1,000 years later, maybe the year, after probably the Babylonian exile, it was written down because they started to lose it. Because in Babylonia, they spoke Aramaic.
Yeah.
They didn't speak Hebrew anymore. So they wrote it down and it became it was a passed down tradition, father to son, essentially. And then, until, girls typically did not read Torah until 1921. It's the same, I mentioned, the year of women's suffrage was the first bat mitzvah, was the first girl that was called to the Torah at the age of 13 to read from Torah. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to read Torah. It's not a simple thing. And people that think, oh, I can just read Torah. I've had Israelis, and their mother tongue is Hebrew. They read the newspaper in Hebrew and they think, oh, because they said, oh, I can read the Torah. Well, you're sure? Oh, I can. Forget it. There's no vowels. There's no punctuation. There's nothing that tells you when to stop and when to start. You don't know when a sentence ends, when a sentence begins. Okay. And I've heard some pretty bad Torah reading in my time. And it's like anything, it's like any skill. The more you do it, better you get at it. The first time Judy read Torah was at a bat mitzvah, like 20, 30, maybe 30 years ago. And the first time it took maybe 6 months or something.
It took a long time.
It took maybe 6 months. And then the next time she read it, it took 4 months. And the next time it took 3 months.
And that's just to read a few sentences.
Just to read 3 or 4 sentences. And then we had a woman, a retired, actually stewardess, airline stewardess, and she wanted to read Torah. And the first time it took her 3 months, and then it took her 2 months, and then it took her 1 month, and then it took her 3 weeks, and then she moved away. Doggone it. She was just getting good, and then she moved away. So anyway, what's the time? I have no idea what.
It's
almost that time.
7:55.
Oh my God, I covered like nothing of what I was going to cover today, but this is okay. So any other,
A rabbi is a lifelong calling, right? You don't go to seminary for a few years.
You mean I can't
and
quit?
be a pastor for 5 years and then go into a different career.
You could. Some rabbis, decide to sell real estate. I don't know. Typically, I chose this. Well, it kind of chose me. I didn't choose it. I had no idea I would be a rabbi at all.
You used to say if someone had asked me 10 years ago,
this was like 25 years ago.
Would I go to the moon or become a rabbi? It was go to the moon.
I was more likely to go to the moon than to become a rabbi. I had no intention. I wanted nothing to do with it. And then just slowly things happened. I was being pulled and I didn't know it. Things were happening. Little unconnected things. All of a sudden this happened, and then we moved somewhere, and then that happened, and they needed someone to to read, and I can do it because I was brought up Orthodox and I lived in Israel for many years.
Right.
So I have a certain ability and skill. And so people found out that I could do it, and then they'd ask me to do, and then do more and do more. And then Judy got a call from, because she was in a women's band, a Jewish women's band called Chicken Soup. And she got called to,
They wanted to know if I could lead services at this Jewish retirement center. And I said, well, I could kind of do it, but if you want like the right person, a better match would be my husband. So if he'll do it, that would be better. And then,
one thing led to one
and
thing.
then, and then when he started doing that, it was.
And I loved it. And it's very different than being a cantor. A cantor, you just sing, because that's what I did before. I would sing. But this is, being the rabbi is very, very different. You get to do this kind of thing. And the main thing, I'll tell you the truth, is you get to tell jokes. And that,
Tell
that's it.
jokes.
A cantor does not tell jokes, because he'll be out on it. The rabbi gets to tell the joke. So
Could you-
I need the belt for
Here's the
her,
belt.
please. Where's the belt?
Could you answer a question? Now,
Maybe.
these are in the synagogue, this thing.
This thing.
And now what do people have in their home? Do they have those?
Which gets me to something, okay?
Okay.
That's very good.
Good segue.
And your name is?
Betty.
Betty,
Nice
good
job,
for,
Betty.
good job, Betty. So I'm gonna read, I don't have time today, but I'll start next week, because it's 8 o'clock, unless you want to be here till 8:15, I don't mind. But, okay, does anybody mind?
No.
Wow, okay, so good, okay. So I will tell you, this will be the last thing we're going to do. And,
I get it.
okay,
You get it.
okay.
I'm
It's a
gonna
little
put that
low.
dress in.
Needs to be, okay.
David.
So we'll put the dress, just put it, don't put it on her because that'll take too long. I want to read. Everybody can sit down. Now I want to tell you something important. Oh, perfect, Chad. Thank you. So,
I'm in the way.
yeah, I don't know. I want to come here a little bit. So on Zoom, everybody's okay? The Zoomsters are okay? Okay. Good. Thumbs up. Okay, good. So, actually, that's not good. I want to be more like that and up a little bit. So I want to read to you from, see, we read from here, this page, more or less. I jumped forward to here. How long did that take me? Can I do it again? Count, okay. I was here, I went to here.
1 second.
How long did that take?
1 second.
Now, if I roll the Torah from where it is now to the back to the end, how long would it take me? It would take me, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It would take me a lot. I would need 2 people to do it right. I'd have to go back a few times because the Torah, it doesn't exactly roll straight. It kind of creeps up, it creeps down. I mean, it's it would take me 20 minutes versus a second. That's the difference between a scroll and a book. Okay, now there's another difference. Gutenberg, when was Gutenberg?
15th century.
1440-ish. Gutenberg invents movable type. One of the side effects of that is this church. How did I get there? The reason is that the cost of books, the cost of a text went down 99%. Right? When there's I see a few gray hairs, not a lot, but there's a few gray hairs in here. You remember when long distance calling was expensive. When your father came downstairs, when you were on a long distance call, said, "You're on a long distance call. What are you doing?" It cost 30 cents a minute when gas cost 30 cents a gallon. Right. So, but we've lived through a revolution in telecom. You can talk to anybody anywhere in the world for free, anytime, day or night. Well, this is a similar kind of revolution that happened with movable type, because books became cheap. They became 1% of their price, which means people could buy them. And people could buy them, they wanted to learn how to read. In 1440, maybe 5% of Europe could read. Who could read? The nobility could read, The priests could read and the Jews could read. Every Jewish boy could read and many Jewish girls could read, right? But the peasants couldn't read. But if they're going to buy a book, what's the heck of having, why do we have it on the shelf? We can't read it. So people learned how to read, and they didn't take the priest's word for it anymore because they owned the book and they had it in their own home and they could read it in Latin, or they could read it in Greek, or they could read it in English or German, and they could read it themselves. And that leads to, within 70 years, the Reformation, right? Martin Luther's post his thesis, I think 1517. So you have 77 years between those two events. They are not disconnected. They're very connected, right? So you see how efficient a book is and how cheap a book is, right? So I like to read the end of the book, right?
He printed his theses too.
He printed them. Yeah, because, and he printed pamphlets and he printed posters and he printed booklets and he dispersed them everywhere because they were cheap. He could afford it. Why do you get so much email? Because it's free to send it to you, right? If it costs $1 an email, you'd get like 5 emails a day, right? You wouldn't get anything. Wouldn't that be nice? Vaya'al Moshe me'arvot Moav. I'm not going to sing. I don't sing this ever. I always read it. I don't know why. Just my tradition. Vaya'al Moshe me'arvot Moav, and Moses went up from the plains of Moab, El Har Nevo, to Mount Nevo, Rosh HaPisgah, to the head of the precipice, Asher al Pnei Recho, that is on the face of Jericho, across from Jericho. Vayar'ehu Adonai et kol haaretz, and God showed him all the land. Et HaGilad ad Dan, from Gilad to Dan. And you know Gilad, maybe you don't. You know Gilad from Eliyahu HaGiladi. He was from Gilad, Elijah from Gilad. Viet kol Naphtali, and all the area of the tribe of Naphtali. Viet Eretz Ephraim, and the land of Ephraim, Umenashe, and the land of Menashe, which is now the Jordan, I believe, proper. Viet kol Eretz Yehuda, and the land of Judah, which is Jerusalem, is in Judah. Ad Hayama Acharon, until the last sea, which is the Mediterranean. Viet HaNegev, the Negev desert, which we go to in the winters when we can. Viet HaKikar, in the center. Bikat Yerecho, the depression of Yerecho, of Jericho. Ir HaTmarim, the city of dates, which it still is. To the best dates in the world are grown below sea level, right? Hatmarim ad Tzoar, until Tzoar. Vayomer Adonai elav, and God said to him, Zot haaretz, this is the land, Asher nishbati la'Avraham, that I promised to Abraham, LeYitzchak, and to Isaac, uLeYaakov, and to Jacob, Lemor, saying, LeZaracha et nena, to your offspring I will give it, Hiriticha ve'einecha, I will show it to you in your eye, V'shama lo ta'avor, but you will not cross over there. And it's avor, ever, it's ivri, it's the same word. Abraham crosses boundaries. Sham lo ta'avor, you will not cross that boundary. So the beginning of our history and the end, this end of the first part of our history is the same word, ever, la'avor. Vayamat sham Moshe, and Moses died there. Eved Adonai, servant of God, V'eretz Moab al pi Adonai. He died in the land of Moab from the mouth of God, that the tradition is that God kissed him and sucked out the breath, right? The same way breath was blown in, breath was taken out, right? Mul Beit Paor v'lo atzi, vayikbor oto v'gai, and he buried him in a depression, and a small kind of a depression. Be'eretz Moab, in the land of Moab, Mul Beit Paor, across from Beit Paor. V'lo yada ish et kavuroto ad hayom hazeh, and no person knows where he is buried until this day, which is also true. U'Moshe ben ma'ah ve'esrim shana, and Moses was 120 years old. We bless people with this. We say ad 120 to 120, right? Why? I'll tell you why in a minute. To 120. Me'ah ve'esrim shana b'moto, at his death. V'lo kahata eino, and his eye had not dimmed. V'lo nes lecho, and his power had not diminished. Vayivku v'nei Yisrael et Moshe be'avot Moab, And the children of Israel cried for Moses in Moab, Shloshim Yom, 30 days. We still mourn for 30 days. Vayitmu Yemei Vechi Eber Moshe, and the days of mourning for Moses passed. V'Yehoshua ben Nun, and Joshua the son of Nun, Malei Ruach Chachma, who was full of the wisdom, the spirit, the Ruach Chachma, the spirit of wisdom, or the wind of wisdom, Ki Samach Moshe et Yadav, because Moses had placed his hand upon him. And when a rabbi becomes a rabbi, he gets smicha. It's the same word from samach et yadav. Allah vayishma'u elav, and they listened to him, Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. That's the real big miracle here, that the Jews actually listened to somebody. Vaya'asu ka'asher tziva Adonai et Moshe, and they did according to what Moses had commanded. V'lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe asher yad'o Adonai panim el panim, and no prophet arose since or before among Israel that knew God face to face. Even though it says specifically you can't see my face and live, but it says it here a slightly different way. L'chol ha'otot, and all the signs, v'hamoftim, and the wonders, asher shalcho Adonai, that God sent, la'asot be'eretz Mitzrayim, to do in the land of Egypt, leFaro, to Pharaoh, u'lechol avodav, and all of his servants, u'lechol atzo, and to all of his land, u'lechol hayad ha'chazakah, u'lechol hamar'ah hagadol, and the strong hand, and all of the signs and wonders, the great signs, asher asa Moshe, that Moses did, le'enei kol Yisrael, to the eyes of all of Israel. So that's the end of the Torah. It's the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is Moses, our teacher. And so, and I read this every year at Passover time. It's not traditional to do it, but I do it. And my son, my middle son, not this son, my middle son, wrote a beautiful poem about Moses, which I'll read to you next week. So that gives you a reason to come. And so I wanted, because we started here, I wanted to finish here and also tell you the incredible technological advance that happened 600 years ago, roughly, from scrolls to books, and how it literally changed the world. And we are in a building that is proof of that. So, ay, 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 louder. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 soft. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay.